Hi all and welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be doing something very exciting. We are going to finally take a look at the OPPO Find N2 Flip. Now I've been begging OPPO to send me this phone over for review, and now that they have, I am glad to say that this is quite possibly the best foldable smartphone on the market right now. However, there are still a few areas where the trusty Motorola RAZR 2022 is still a little bit better. So let's talk about it. Firstly, if you want to see more videos like this, make sure that you've liked and subscribed, and hopefully I'll make more YouTube videos now that I'm monetized. Yay! So please support my dream in transitioning to being a YouTuber by subscribing. Anyway, I've always had a fascination with folding phones. As soon as the Royale Flex Pi appeared in some reviewers' hands 5 years ago, I realized that this is probably where the future of consumer technology was headed. Despite that phone being an absolute train wreck, the idea that you can just take a larger device and make it pocketable by folding it in half is just too alluring for words. While progress has been relatively uneventful in the sector of late, we have seen a raft of flexible phones arrive on the market during that time in two main form factors. Firstly, we've had the folding mini tablets like the Galaxy Fold and OPPO N2 Fold series, and we've also got the flip style phones like the Motorola RAZR and also the Galaxy Flip that basically take a normal large phone and make it fold in half. In Western markets, Samsung has definitely been the main player in both markets so far, but Motorola have been at it too. I convinced Motorola to give me the 2022 RAZR last year, and I was so impressed with this particular phone that I've been carrying it around as one of my dailies for the past 6 months or so. It really is quite marvelous. I mean, despite some of the less than glowing reviews it's received from some outlets, it's really been quite a remarkable phone. It's super fast with a Snapdragon Gen 1 processor, it's got decent battery life despite the smallish battery, it's got a relatively minimal crease with the water droplet style hinge. The hinge can stand up pretty well as well, and most of all, it has an absolutely terrific cover display, as you can see over there. At 2.8 inches, it was the largest at the time, which meant that you could use it to use apps like, I don't know, like Maps, which worked fantastically. You could play games like Asphalt 9 if the service went down right now, and you can even use it to scroll through Twitter, albeit in quite a laughably limited way. Just look at that. However, being a horizontal screen, apps rarely formatted correctly, as you can see here, but it was something that I was happy to play with. Now enter the OPPO Find N2 Flip. Now when this phone was announced, I was simply shocked by how pretty it was. Now it's safe to say that the RAZR 2022 wasn't exactly a looker, especially after the earlier models that looked simply stunning. Not only did the 2022 model lose the distinctive chin, but it was only available in a boring all black color. The matte aluminium frame and the matte rear glass don't help either, and the thick bezels and also the exposed hinge elements over here don't make the most refined impression as well. The OPPO is basically the complete opposite, with its shiny steel frame, eye-catching purple color, and thin bezels. It is simply leagues better looking than the Motorola. To be fair, it's so good looking that I would say that it's up there with absolute classics like the iPhone 4 and Nokia N9, and it's also a little bit skinnier than the RAZR 2, which really helps because the RAZR was just a little bit too wide to hold comfortably in one hand. And now we come to the main visual draw of the OPPO, the front cover display. At 3.2 inches, it is comfortably larger than the 2.8 of the RAZR, and it's most definitely larger than the tiny 1.9 inches of the Samsung Flip 4. As this is a vertical display with a great peak brightness of 900 nits, one might think that it would be great for running apps on without issue. I mean, it's larger than the screen on both the UniHertz Jelly 2 and also the Palm phone, which in their day were both fully featured smartphones kind of. But as I would explain later, this is probably where my biggest disappointment with the phone lies. Anyway, let's take a look at the rest of the hardware. Firstly, I love how the stainless steel just wraps into the curved glass almost seamlessly. It really just feels fantastic in the hand. On the front you also have your two cameras. You've got a 50 megapixel main unit and also an 8 megapixel ultra wide. I do like how they've designed the lenses in a way that actually complements the design, because there are few greater eyesores than the camera units on the back of the iPhone 14 Pro. I mean, just look at how ugly that is. And also, Motorola's solution over here was not the prettiest either. On the right-hand side of the phone, we do have the power button that also contains a fingerprint reader that works pretty well, and we've also got our volume buttons. But as with always, just like on the RAZR as well, when you open up your phone, it's sort of in a reverse position to when it was closed, so that confuses me all the time. And on the back of the phone, although we don't have wireless charging, another great disappointment that's shared with the RAZR phone, we do have, luckily, the OPPO logo, and we've also got the Hasselblad logo. And this Hasselblad logo tells us that the cameras do have the Hasselblad features that we took a look at on the Find X5 phone, and I'm glad that most of those features, like the X-Pan modes and also the fantastic film simulation modes, have carried over. And now let's finally open up the phone and see its main drawer, the hinge quite possibly. And wow, I just don't know if it's just because it's extremely well oiled, but the hinge just feels absolutely amazing. It feels so much smoother than the hinge on the RAZR. There's none of that mechanical grittiness that you get with some other foldables, and this particular unit has been around the block as well. I think a few other reviewers have used it before me. It's firm without being stiff. It stays up where you want it, although the angle doesn't go as far as some other phones like the RAZR. And quite importantly as well, it doesn't wobble either. For example, when you've got the RAZR open like so, the screen does wobble a little bit. On the OPPO, it is all nice and firm. Best of all, however, if you look at the Motorola, you've got the water drop style hinge, which means that the crease is relatively minimal. And on the OPPO, we've also got the same thing. This basically means that the radii of the hinge is larger than what you find on a Samsung phone, which should hopefully mean it doesn't crack. And also when you close it, there is zero gap, which is very nice to have. Don't get me wrong, you can still feel the crease and hinge under your finger, but it is so far ahead of where Samsung is right now that it's a little bit silly. And this style of hinge also seems to be fairly tough, as I have not heard any issues about cracking and things like that that you find with the Samsung phones. And now that we've got the phone opened up, you can see the massive 6.8-inch OLED display, and it's a really good one. It reaches up to 1600 nits peak brightness, which is plenty for any outdoor conditions, and it looks really nice as well. It's 120 Hz as you might expect, and it looks fantastic for a phone like this. The aspect ratio is quite tall, as you can see, especially if you compare it with the Motorola. However, that just makes it a little bit easier to hold. On the top of the display, there is a little cut-hole camera for a 32 megapixel selfie camera, and while it is definitely not great, I mean, just look at that. It actually looks pretty good in studio lighting actually. But I never felt the need to use it during my daily testing, so I'm sure that it won't matter for most users. And I also just like to comment about how thin the bezels are. Let's just compare it with the Motorola again, and the bezels are just leagues ahead, and also the hinge elements on the OPPO are hidden away, unlike the exposed ones of the RAZR. It just looks a lot cleaner to me. And also I do get lint caught up in the hinge on the RAZR as well, which should hopefully be avoided on the OPPO. And on the top of the phone, we can see that it's got a little earpiece, and this is just part of the stereo speaker array, and it sounds pretty good, especially when you consider that the phone is just over 7mm in thickness, which is very thin for a modern phone, as phones have been getting fatter and fatter these days. You can also probably see right now that there is an always on display on the inside of the phone too, which does seem to be a little bit superfluous. But if you just enjoy leaving your phone open on your desk for some reason, I guess this is a feature for you. Another great thing that it does better than the Motorola is that the always on display also extends to the the cover screen. Now, I've been quite annoyed with the Motorola because while you do have something that looks like an always-on display, it does turn off after a while and you just get a blank screen, which, you know, it just takes me back to 2017. On the OPPO, however, we do get an always-on display on the cover screen. It's fantastic to see. However, it doesn't seem to scale properly for the cover display as everything is a little bit small, as you can see, but at least it is there. And now let's talk about the cover display. Now there's two fields of thought here. When designing software for a small screen like the cover display on a flip phone, you can either design an interface that's specific to the cover display, providing a minimal but polished and curated experience, sort of like the glances on an early Apple Watch, or you can just allow anything and everything to run and let the user decide what they want, like on the Motorola. Now that's a great thing with the RAZR. Like within reason, you can run whatever you want, as you saw earlier. While you do have your glances like so, they're not as fully featured as what you find on the OPPO. However, you can literally open up any app you want, like Instagram. I mean, just look at how terrible Instagram works, but at least it's there, and you can even multitask between apps. Let's see if Asphalt's working. But no, I think the servers are down. That's disappointing. But more realistically, on the RAZR, you can open up messages and respond to them, and you can also get your maps working, which is definitely quite useful. While it doesn't always work brilliantly, the freedom that it provides is just great, because opening up the phone isn't always the easiest thing to do. Now, what OPPO have decided to do is provide a more simplified, however, more polished experience. As you can see here, there's a number of wallpapers that you can choose from. I personally love the animal one, so they have sort of remind me of a Tamagotchi or even Microsoft Clippy, and it is absolutely adorable. You can swipe down to access your quick settings, just like on the Motorola, and you can swipe up from the bottom to see your notifications. While you can interact with some notifications, like let's have a look at this Twitter one, you can reply with a emoji, you can reply with a predetermined text, or you can tap to speak. Most of the time, however, it will ask you to open up your phone to interact with it. For example, with this TikTok thing, I have to unfold to continue, and that is a little bit annoying at times. So while you can't reply to all of the messages that you could want, luckily on the cover display, you can do some other things too. For example, if you swipe across, you can start accessing your apps that work a little bit like the aforementioned Apple Watch glances. Firstly, you do have the camera app, which does work pretty brilliantly. It's one of my favorite things about this phone. And to close, I do like that it's a swipe down, a bit like on Migo on the Nokia N9. Next up, you also have the weather. Unfortunately, this is a very basic app. You can't really do anything with it at all, but it is very pretty. You also have a calendar app. As you can see, I've got nothing on today. We've also got a timer, which works pretty well. As you can see, it works brilliantly. You've got a voice recorder, which I haven't really used. You've got access to your earphones, and also there is a Spotify widget. Now this is great, as it provides just enough information for you to interact with your Spotify very quickly. It looks very good. However, coming from someone who doesn't really use Spotify, I use Apple Music, I do wish that other apps will start developing for the OPPO's cover display as well. It's been more than 2 months since launch now, and Spotify is still the only third-party app. I do hope that this does catch on a little bit more. So in all, it's fine, but I do wish that you could do a little bit more on the OPPO's cover display. So now let's just see what the phone's like to use. It's got a MediaTek Dimensity 9000 Plus processor, and inside there is a 4300 milliamp battery as well, with 8 GB of RAM. And performance, to be fair, has been impeccable. I was a little bit scared about the MediaTek processor, as I wasn't too familiar with it outside of the Reno 8 Pro that I've used as well, but it just runs absolutely flawlessly. As you can see, the OS is ColorOS 13, which is a lightly skinned Android 13, and it runs with aplomb. What they are promising is at least 3 major Android upgrades, which is just fantastic to hear, and it's just basically got all the normal ColorOS features too. So it's got like the fantastic implementation of the O haptics, which means that almost everything you do, there's just a little bit of haptic feedback. Like when you go through your apps, it just feels very lovely. You've got great multitasking, including floating window implementation. It's got really slick animations, and overall it's a pretty great Android skin. I would not really complain about it at all. The battery life on this phone is also fantastic. There's more than enough to get you through an entire day's worth of use, which is definitely not the case with a lot of other foldables. And now let's finally talk about the cameras. Now, the cameras are traditionally a weak spot of the foldable, especially with flip phones, as there basically is no space to put anything. And the RAZR did fortunately have a surprisingly good main camera last year, and I'm glad to say that the OPPO doesn't disappoint there either. Firstly, there isn't really the space to fit any form of optical image stabilization on the main 50 megapixel camera, which is a fairly large 1 in 5.6 sensor, but it probably isn't something that you would really notice. Images just in general look fantastic. You've got great colors, they're very sharp. HDR is quite aggressive, but that's the case with most phones. And as you can see, the night photos look pretty great too. The ultra-wide camera at 8 megapixels and with a smaller sensor, however, is less impressive. But again, that is the case with almost all phones in this class, and it still works at a pinch. What is really great about this camera system though is that it's attached to a flip phone, which means that it's basically the ultimate vlogging camera. I mean, just look at that. It is simply fantastic. The cover display is the perfect size and also in the perfect position to shoot yourself, and as you can see, the video looks fantastic despite not having any OIS. The form factor also means that you can basically put it on any surface without the use of a tripod, and you can even hold it up like an old video camera like so, which makes it very fun to use. So yeah, this is definitely pretty cool to use, but a little bit awkward to hold for a long time. But as you can see though, the result really is quite fantastic. The image quality is great. But what's even better than that is that you still have access to all of the Hasselblad features that we looked at on the Find X5 video. So you get things like this X-Pan mode, which is very fun. It emulates an old film camera. Looks very cool. And also you get access to all of your favorite film simulation modes by pressing this button over here. We've got Original, we've got Radiance, and here we go, here's Serenity. This one's my favorite. And doesn't that just look fantastic? It looks just like old film. So while it might not technically have the best camera, especially if we take a look at the Find X6 that is unfortunately not available in Australia, it definitely is one of the most fun cameras that you can use on any phone. And also, just a little side note here, I would just love to request a teleprompter app that works with the cover display, because this would just turn it into like the ultimate ultra mobile camera for social media. Imagine just like reading off a script on that screen. It would be fantastic. And also, just another quick note, I would just love OPPO to copy Motorola's double twist gesture. So to turn on the camera on the Motorola, all you do is that and your camera is on. I would just love to see other phones like this get that, because I just miss it every time I don't use Motorola. So in conclusion, should you buy the OPPO Find N2 Flip? Well, at 1,500 Australian dollars for the lone 256GB option, I would say absolutely. It's definitely one of the most accomplished phones that you can buy right now, and it also just happens to be a flip phone too, which just makes it all the more fun. It's fun, stylish, extremely fast, has great cameras, and is relatively affordable as well. I mean, sure, it doesn't have all of the cover screen features of the RAZR, but considering that this is OPPO's first flip phone, it is definitely quite a remarkable achievement. I honestly cannot wait to see how the Flip N3 looks. So please subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Don't forget to like the video as well, and comment if you are interested in switching to a foldable OPPO phone. And on that note, until next time, toodaloo.